Yeah, thank you.
Just a few things before I start. First of all, thank you for discussing those research efforts that we put forth. I kept waiting for the but. So that's what I really want to thank you for, is not pointing out the flaws in all those papers. So thank you. And this group, the other thing I wanted to say is that I've learned so much already this morning. Such a great group. All the talks have been so informative. And not, I know we generally think about this as sort of a research conference, but, I learned so much about things that might even modify my practice from all of you, so thank you for that. In this trial, I try to give an update every year or two at this meeting, and we're right sort of at an inflection point as we've finished the enrollment and almost the outcome collection for the trial. And I won't be able to share any of the results because I'm blinded. Tanda is not blinded, but she's not allowed to share them because she's forbidden. But Tanda actually has done the heavy lifting on the actual administration of the trial in partnership actually with Bobby Jones CSF, and I'll talk a little bit about that going forward. It doesn't really need any introduction, but one of the most controversial things, as you know, in the treatment of Kyary with or without Syringomyelia is whether or not to perform an extradural decompression versus adding Duraplasty. And again, I won't spend any time going through this. When you look back at our data about how we address this question, it really is, it's been a question for more than 20 years. And just as evidence of this is a meta-analysis that is now 12 years old and references data 10 years before that. So this is something that we've been thinking about for a long time. Here's another meta-analysis from 2017, same kind of thing, and the same findings, and this is 10 years afterwards. And really, as you know, the question is, it does seem like that Duraplasty may be associated with higher rates of complications, and a lot of those are related to CSF hydrodynamics. It takes longer to do the actual surgery. On the other hand, it may be more effective, and so that's the question really at the root of this study I'm going to talk about. Here's an editorial from Todd Hankinson, Shane Tubbs, and Jay Wellens. Really, again, it's all about this. All of our data is not high-quality data. We need to do a prospective RCT. Here's another one from just last year. We need to do an RCT. So back in 2011, we started this multi-institutional platform that we call Park Reeves. And we were able to do this through the generous donation of the Reeves family that you can see there. And we created this multi-institutional group of multiple specialties, including neurosurgeons, orthopedic spine surgeons, and patient advocates. And the goal was to collect data on 1,000 patients. At the time, we weren't thinking about doing a randomized control trial, just a registry. And we started actually with just 5 centers, and it sort of grew organically over the years, mainly because people would say, hey, I'm really interested, I'm serious about this. And over time, it grew to 42, and that's where we are now. And as we got more and more preliminary data, and we built the infrastructure, and investigators were quite committed to it, we went ahead and applied for a grant in order to address this question about Duraplasty. And our application and the concept and rationale were endorsed by the major neurosurgical organizations. They read the grant, the data elements before we submitted it. And this is really important for PCORI, which is the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. We actually partnered with Bobby Jones CSF. It's hard for me to say that. I still just want to say CSF. So in some, I may just say that. And the structure of this grant is called a cluster RCT. So, there are 2 kinds of randomized controlled trials. There's the kind where you roll the patient back into the operating room and you flip a coin. Usually it's an electronic coin flip. But we did not do that, and there are a lot of reasons for that I can go into. But we did a cluster RCT, which means we randomized by site. So certain sites for the entire cohort were randomized to either doing Duraplasty or extradural. We had training videos, parameters on the operations, and so forth. As many of you know, surgeons feel quite passionately about that they already know the best answer, and that meant that at times people weren't necessarily delighted at their allocation, whether they were allocated to the extradural and they were strong, Duraplasty folks, or the opposite. And that was something, that we did have to work through, and fortunately, we were successful with that. The whole key to this, of course, is really to help with a paradigm shift away from what we're doing now, which is single center surgeon preferences and experiences, and trying to think about this more globally. Not just to optimize the care of one patient in one center, but sort of across surgeons as they train coming forward. And so it's really an investment in the treatment of these children going forward. And we had 3 aims, and I'll just read them very quickly. I won't read the whole slides, but the first aim, PCORI was most interested in this RFA, or request for applications, in complications and harm to patients. So the first aim was to determine if PFD, that's the extradural operation, was associated with fewer surgical complications. And of course, our hypothesis was that PFD would be associated with fewer surgical complications, and we looked at many different complications in different time intervals. The second aim was to determine if the extradural operation provided non-inferior clinical improvement and Syring's regression compared to the Duraplasty operation. Now, the level of evidence and statistical sophistication in superiority, equivalence, and non-inferiority is variable, and has to do with the design of the trial. And again, kind of beyond what we'd like to get in today, but essentially a non-inferior trial is it makes it an achievable trial. And then lastly, we looked at quality of life, and I will circle back on that because of Dr. Orr's really wonderful talk here. So we knew that the enrollment criteria would be controversial, and across the investigators, we actually set enrollment criteria, and then we revised it using a Delphi technique, because really the truth is we submitted all the paperwork, people said yes, 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 and then when it came out, hey, we're ready to go, they said, wait a second, wait a second. So we wanted to revisit the inclusion criteria, and specifically the Kyary criteria, and you could argue whether 5 millimeters is right or wrong. We didn't want to get into that, but we wanted to be in a category where neurosurgeons would, across the network, would uniformly agree, okay, this probably counts. And then the Syrinx size, so we were careful not to include that sort of category of T2 signal abnormalities that would be considered a dilated central canal instead. So we set our minimum at 3 millimeters in terms of Syrinx diameter, and our maximum at 10. And the reason for the 10 was that if it gets beyond 10, we felt like, as a pool of investigators, that there wouldn't be equipoise in offering the extradural operation. And then you can see the exclusion criteria, including basilar invagination and an acute clival canal angle. And Dr. Oro did discuss this paper. One of the things we were most concerned about, especially because this is funded through the PCORI, was how we monitor quality of life. And one of the things, I think the themes of this talk right now that I'm giving is that I've been fortunate to surround myself with great people, and a lot of the quality of life work that I've been able to contribute is really through the efforts of people like specifically Jacob Greenberg here on the left. And so Dr. Oro already kind of talked about how we need to get away from gestalt impression, especially as a surgical outcome, and instead use disease-specific quality of life instruments. And our collaborators, very close collaborators at Vanderbilt, Jay Wellens and Sheva Shannon, developed this, what they call the CHIP, or the Kyary Health Index in pediatrics. And this, actually, to get to Courtney's question, this is given, because it's all in children, to parents. So it's validated both for parent report or patient report, and it's above the age of 5. And so this is not dissimilar to Dr. Frim's scale, the Chicago Chiari outcome scale, in that it also surveys pain and non-pain kinds of symptoms, and essentially allows a composite index of health-related quality of life. And then finally, we use the CSI that, again, Jacob Greenberg helped to develop to stratify our patients for the trial. The trial is scripted in a significant way. The database is relatively thorough, as many of you in the audience know, and it is scripted where we interrogate and query the various data points. So obviously before surgery, and then less than 1 month follow-up, 3 to 6 months follow-up, and then at 12 months of follow-up. And we collect clinical data, radiological data, and then quality of life data, both with the CHIP and then also with a generic health-related quality of life index called the HUE-3, which is, again, validated in children. And the one thing I wanted to say, again, surrounding myself with excellent people, is that when we first started this trial, I think we had lots of enthusiasm from the investigators in the neurosurgery community. It turns out that's not where you need the enthusiasm. You need it from the patients to be able to contribute. And there was a little bit of noise online that our patients themselves were maybe not as enthusiastic about participating. And this is something that Bobby Jones CSF really helped us through by being supportive of the trial, and you'll see that again and again in the next few slides, and helping us to sort of reassure patients that this is an important research question, maybe the most important, and that that the opinion of a single surgeon is very, very valuable, but the data that helps to inform that opinion is perhaps just as valuable. So we did, again, I can't thank CSF enough. They helped not just by posting about it through their social media sites, but also providing brochures that were handed out to the various institutions in the clinic. So if a patient was being offered participation, then they had an information packet that was in patient-friendly language and had the endorsement of CSF. So it was very, very helpful. And PCORI also really strongly favors involving patients in the patient community in the trial. And so as written into the grant was funding to help support these efforts. And one of them was a St. Louis chapter of CSF. And we do this 1 to 2 times a year, where actually everybody you see from CSF here in the room comes to St. Up and helps us to run a community advisory panel. And it's been really great. And then CSF posts the videos from that up to a website, and it's, again, a great partnership. The engagement activities, though, extend beyond this patient chapter to I come and give a report frequently. You can see here the first thing listed there. But we also give reports to several of the other advocacy organizations, and then also at other advisory panels, especially in Nashville. We've given reports at the PCORI annual meeting in Bethesda, and then, of course, at many of the pediatric neurosurgery meetings, we have a report because they're many of our clinical stakeholders. So our enrollment target was 148, and we screened 998 patients and excluded the vast majority based almost entirely on syrinx size and many times tonsillar position. and offered enrollment and successfully enrolled 163. So we actually exceeded our target, which again, I'm going to give all credit to Tanda Meehan over here, and also CSF for helping with patient information, and then a small amount of credit to myself for sending rock band t-shirts to everybody who enrolled a patient. You guys probably know about that, but I spent hours and hours trying to research every person. I think I owe Eric yours. Don't I still owe you? Somebody make a note of that. I owe Eric Jackson. So, but that actually was kind of an interesting thing, because people would then take a picture of themselves wearing their T-shirt and text it around to people, and I think it made it fun for people. But in the end, we enrolled 161 participants who ultimately had surgery, which is an amazing feat, and again due to surrounding myself with great people. So very excited about that. So we're actually coming up on the last bit of data collection for that 1 year time point, and these are some of the presenting demographic information. You can see there's a female preponderance, there's a vast non-Hispanic white preponderance. The average age was 10 years of age, and you can see the radiological parameters there of tonsillar ectopia, median syrinx diameter, and the CXA. And not surprisingly, the most common symptom was headaches. We do have some granularity of where the headaches are, how they present, and so forth. And again, these data slides I'm going to show you for the next few are all from the DSMB that was actually done maybe last week. So there is much more information to be had, but I don't have access to that until the study's over. So again, headaches, and then you can see neck pain and numbness and tingling, particularly in the upper extremities. And this is all Tanda here. This is how we retained our patients throughout the trial. And there's typically in clinical trials, there's a huge drop-off from enrollment downward, and you can see that as of the 6-month time point, we're at 98% retention, which is unheard of. And then the 12-month, you can see we're at 89, but we're not quite at that 12-month time point, so we expect that to increase too. So again, I do want to acknowledge Tanda, who has been on this on a daily basis or weekly basis, and it's really unprecedented follow-up. I think part of that is also related to the strength of the relationship between a physician and the patient with this particular condition as well. So the study follow-up will be completed in about 2 months here, and the data will be available, and we'll be reporting it soon. There is a phase called peer review, not manuscript peer review, but where PCORI will take our data that we've generated, evaluate the statistics, the findings before it's submitted for publication, and that's a 6-month period. And so that will start here shortly, and so we won't actually be submitting for publication until after that. Just a few things. I did manage to get some data on complications just this morning, or actually yesterday, from the DSMB meeting. So I was just going to show a few things. Interoperative complications, not surprisingly, are rare. We only saw it in 2 patients. The complications that we saw are very, very much what you would expect. CSF leak is rare, but it happens. This is leak through the skin, pseudomeningocele, chemical meningitis, infection, and you can see that about 10% of patients of all comers in both arms combined, not one arm versus the other, had complications, as you can see. And then additional neurosurgical procedures for complication management. This is just a little information to show you there. You can see, especially in the middle panel, it's relatively uncommon to need additional surgical treatments, as Dr. Jackson was telling us earlier. So just to kind of to finish up with that, enrollment is complete. Importantly, all the demographics, baseline characteristics, medical history, and anatomical factors were in line with what we predicted in the design of the study. The complication rates were low and consistent with pre-study design, we have high agreement with the expected exams in terms of our follow-up. So it seems like everything's on track, and again, a great team has really been tremendously helpful in this. Now, I'm going to stop there talking about the trial, and maybe I just wanted to say one or two words about a separate topic, so maybe I can take questions about that if there are any now. Dorothy.
Do you have any of those slides, statistics, just start a preliminary, going out to our patients? Because the biggest complaint is that there's a trial and we never hear anything about it.
Well, that's why it's called a blinded trial. I think if we were to allow you to disseminate that, we would not be able to publish it later. So I prefer not to do that. Yes.
When you assess your pediatric patients, since you're doing age 5 and above, do you look at any school health parameters as a quality indicator of how they return life?
Probably not to the detail that you'd like, but the CHIP does look at whether they are in general classes or have an IEP or 504. It looks at whether they're in an age-appropriate grade, and there are a total of 50 questions, and I don't remember them all,
Okay.
just to be honest. So probably not to the degree that an educational specialist would like, but there's a little bit of that in there. Yeah. John.
What were the reasons for the leg pain, do you think? It's about 10%. Do you think they had tethered cord, or what do you think?
Well, they all have Syringomyelia.
Oh, okay.
So I've assumed that's what it's from. They actually, I didn't show any physical exam findings only because this is all the data that was given to me. But I would imagine that there's going to be ataxia and some sensory motor deficits as well.
And then the dropout rate was low, but the thing is you need to, I think, I would like to know why they dropped out, because I think the risk up front with the Duraplasty is there. All those complications should occur within the first 3 months. But
right.
if you do a procedure that is not going to have the risk up front, but presumably could have risk long term, and you miss out between 3 months and a year, I'd like to know why is this person not showing up?
Right. So we've dealt with that in the experimental design from a statistical standpoint to be able to adjust for that. But I'm going to ask Tanda for her impression on the handful or so that have dropped out.
So yeah, it's a small number, fortunately. A few, and very few of them are because the patients honestly just haven't come back to clinic and they can't track them down, and that's an issue with the patients. The other patients we're seeing due to insurance financing, they instead of at a 12-month postoperative window because they're seen at 6 months, they might be seen at 14 months or 16 months later. And that's consistent with how often the company will pay for their MRIs to be repeated, et cetera. So we're extending the study for 5 additional years, and we are finding patients coming back that we'll have then again data on some of those patients.
I can speak to some of the patients that disappeared. They were my partners who left, and some of being reassigned to other doctors, come in.
Well, we have been tracking them. We have our coordinators.
I know for.
Yeah, our coordinators have been really fantastic. We've been able to, and I think partly because of what Bobby Jones Foundation is doing, the patients appreciate being important. So they actually are calling the original centers and saying, hey, I'm in the study. And I want to make sure you get my data. So they sign a consent to release the data from their new hospital, and then it's sent to the coordinator at the initial center, and they input the data. And I've had probably 4 cases, 4 or 5, maybe a few more, that we've handled it that way.
Yeah. Have people cross over, if you have no Duraplasty, you can cross over to Duraplasty. If it's Duraplasty, you just can just get a redo, I guess. So are you keeping track of that?
We do. I just don't have that. I just didn't get that. That's one of our primary outcomes is revision surgery. And I will tell you that one of the most important things with this extension study is that people may be getting revised 16, 18 months, 2 years down the road. So really capturing these data longitudinally is probably one of the most important things. And it's obvious to all of us in the room that when you do a study in a child, having a 1-year outcome is not sufficient to really understand the developmental implications. So that's the other rationale for extending it. When you design a trial, as probably all of you know, you have to design it very specifically, and you definitely want to continue to follow the cohort down the road. But with the grant application, it's very specific parameters. So I just wanted to take 1 extra minute maybe to talk about some of the work we're doing with genetics. This is not through Park Reeves per se, but many of the contributors are involved in both efforts. So this is through a multi-center collaborative group, and including WashU, of course, and then Utah. Doug Brockmeyer has been a key, and actually as a genetics team there, been key contributors. Stanford University, Duke, Allison has sent us her DNA as well from her patients, Vanderbilt, and you can see the list here. What we've been doing is we're doing whole exome sequencing on patients, and our goal is to sequence 1,000 patients. We've done just over 500 to date, and really sort of working with Allison and Doug and these other groups to be able to really look and investigate copy number variants, rare variants, new mutations, and again, many of the things that you've heard throughout the day today in terms of hypermobility. We did fund this initially through a pilot program, a pilot grant from the Missouri Spinal Cord Injury Research Program, and we're making great progress. We do have a small collaborative that includes this group that's obviously open to anybody who'd like to contribute. It doesn't have to be a Syringomyelia, it can be Kyary alone. It doesn't have to be a child, it can be an adult. So we're interested in augmenting the numbers to get to 1,000. And what we have taken a little bit less of a directed, targeted approach like we heard earlier, looking at exomes, and have identified a cohort of genes, some of which are illustrated here. And Gabe Haller, who works in our department, is a scientist geneticist, not a clinical human geneticist. And he's developing CRISPR models in zebrafish, actually, and then he has an in vitro assay to look at the functional impact of each gene mutation. And so this, what you see here, this fish with scoliosis, is actually one of his recent publications in adolescent idiopathic scoliosis, using the same design of broad human sequencing, identifying candidate genes, evaluating them in vitro for functional importance, and then putting them into a CRISPR model. And we have mice and zebrafish, but the zebrafish are so much more amenable to quick turnaround and development and assessment. So that's what we're doing right now. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that, and that's all I have to say. I appreciate everybody's attention today.
Thank you, Dave. Are there any questions for Dr. Limbrick?
Maybe just a brief comment. I mean, it's transformational what you and your team are doing. That's number one. And number two, the critical importance of the team in getting this kind of work done. So it's awesome.
Thank you very much.
I have one question. Are you going to be looking at the peculiar predominance of Chiari in females that you've also documented in your study?
Sure. That issue is not something that we've tackled yet. I do know, and there are sex-based differences in many diseases that we're becoming increasingly aware of, even brain tumors and the influence of factors related to sex and the growth of tumors. So there's something there we're not quite yet to what to do with, but we're working on it.
Okay.